The billionaire looked her up and down. He took his time with it, the kind of look that is designed to be seen, that performs itself for the room, that invites other people to confirm what the looker has already decided. Then he laughed. "You really think someone who looks like you belongs in this house?" Several guests laughed with him, not all of them, but enough. The heavy-set woman in the cleaning uniform lowered her eyes. She did not argue. She did not explain. She picked up her bucket from beside the service entrance and said very quietly, almost to herself, "I'm only here because your mother asked me to come." That made him laugh even harder. "My mother?" He looked at the room with the expression of someone sharing a particularly good joke. "She'd never invite someone like you." The room went quiet. A voice came from the staircase. "Actually," said the voice, "I begged her to come." Every face turned. Margaret Ashford stood at the top of the staircase in her evening gown, looking down at her son with an expression that was not anger exactly, and was not grief exactly, and was something considerably more final than either. Within the next 10 minutes, Ethan Ashford would discover that the woman he had just humiliated in front of 140 guests had 25 years ago walked into a burning building to save his family. Nobody asked her to. She had never once asked for anything in return. Except one thing, one promise, that his father had broken today, through him. Her name was Clara Bennett, and she was 46 years old, and she worked 3 cleaning jobs. The morning shift was at a medical office building downtown, where she arrived at 5:30 and finished by 9. The midday shift was at a school, where she worked around the children with the specific, unhurried competence of someone who understands that children deserve the same quality of attention as anyone else. She built out the evening shift varied. Private residences, event spaces, occasionally large houses like the Ashford estate, when the event coordination company she contracted with needed additional staff. She was heavyset in the way that certain bodies become over decades of medication and recovery, not the heaviness of indulgence, but the heaviness of a body that has been through something and carries the evidence of it. She moved carefully with the practiced efficiency of someone who has learned to work within the limits of a frame that does not always cooperate. She had a face that people who looked at her properly, which fewer people did than should have, described as genuinely warm, not performed warmth, the real kind that comes from someone who has seen enough hard things to know that most people are doing their best, and the ones who aren't usually have reasons. She took care of her father, Arthur, who had a progressive neurological condition and lived in the apartment 2 floors above hers. She cooked for him 3 times a day when she was not working, which meant she cooked for him at 5 in the morning and 11 at night, and some point in between that depended on the day. She did not describe this as a sacrifice. She described it as Tuesday. People judged Clara Bennett before she spoke approximately 100% of the time. She had accepted this the way you accept weather, not with bitterness, but with a practical awareness that it is a condition of the environment you move through and that being angry about it changes nothing and costs energy she does not have to spare. What she had not accepted, what she had simply never told anyone because it was not the kind of thing she talked about, was what she had done 25 years ago, and what it had cost her. Clara had dreamed of becoming the kind of nurse children remembered for the rest of their lives, the kind who learned their names before looking at their charts, the kind who made the waiting rooms feel less frightening. She was 2 years from finishing her training when everything changed. After the smoke damage to her lungs, she could not climb a single flight of hospital stairs without losing her breath. She had rebuilt her life doing what she could physically manage. She had never spoken about what she had lost. She described it as Tuesday. Before we jump into the story, drop a comment right now telling us where in the world you're watching from.
We have viewers from every continent, and we genuinely love seeing our community. Subscribe right now because tomorrow's story is one you absolutely need to hear. Hit that bell so you don't miss it.
Ethan Ashford was 38 years old and had inherited Ashford Capital 14 months ago when his father Robert died of a stroke on a Wednesday morning with his coffee on the desk beside him. He was successful in the way that certain people are successful, with the specific effortlessness of someone who was given an excellent education and an extensive network and a name that opened doors before he arrived at them. He was not unintelligent, he was not entirely unkind, but he had spent his life in an environment that consistently confirmed his assumptions, which meant his assumptions had grown increasingly large and his tolerance for anything that challenged them had grown increasingly small. He believed, without having consciously formed the belief, that appearance was information, that how a person looked told you something true and useful about who they were and what they were worth. The charity gala was his idea, Ashford Capital's annual philanthropic event, rebranded and expanded under his tenure. He had not known his mother had invited an additional member of the event staff. He had not known because his mother had arranged it privately in a way designed to allow Clara Bennett to be present without requiring Ethan's approval. Margaret had arranged it this way because she knew, with the specific knowledge of a mother who has been watching her son for 38 years, that Ethan had been asked in advance. He would have declined. But there was more to tonight than Margaret had told anyone. She had chosen this particular evening for a reason. Robert Ashford had left instructions, specific, written, sealed, to be carried out on the occasion of the first charity gala held after his death. Margaret had been carrying those instructions for 14 months. Tonight, she finally intended to honor them. What those instructions contained, nobody in the ballroom knew yet. What they would change, by the end of the evening, was everything. The gala was at 8. Clara arrived at 4 to help with the setup. She worked through the afternoon with the other event staff, moving through the Ashford estate with the practiced invisibility of someone who has spent a career in other people's homes. At 7:59, with guests already filling the ballroom, a young waiter named Theo, 19 years old, first event of this scale, hands slightly less steady than he would have liked, caught the edge of a passing tray and sent 3 champagne glasses to the marble floor. The sound was significant. Several guests turned. Theo stood over the broken glass with the expression of a young man calculating how badly this was going to go for him. Clara was beside him before the last piece of glass stopped moving. She did not make a production of it. She knelt, carefully, with the deliberateness of someone who has learned to be thoughtful about sudden movements, and began gathering the larger pieces in her cloth. "It's okay," she said to Theo, without looking up, quietly so only he could hear. "We've all had days like this. Grab the dustpan from the service cart and we'll have it done in 30 seconds. Theo nodded, his face still flushed, and went for the dustpan. They had it done in 25 seconds. "Thank you," he said. He meant it completely. "Don't mention it," Clara said. She gave him the brief, warm smile of someone who has no investment in being thanked for ordinary human decency, and moved back to her station. 2 of the guests who had watched the exchange looked at each other. Neither of them would remember this moment clearly, but it would sit in the back of their minds during what happened next and give them something to compare it to. Ethan Ashford arrived in the ballroom 15 minutes later. Ethan walked through the ballroom with 2 of his business associates, and his attention landed on Clara in the way that his attention sometimes landed on things that did not belong in his aesthetic frame. He stopped. One of his associates said something quiet, and the other one laughed. Ethan looked at Clara with the expression of a man who has decided something and is about to perform the decision for an audience. "Excuse me," Ethan said. Clara stopped and looked at him. "I'm with the events staff," Clara said. Her voice was entirely level. "The Henderson Group. We were contracted through your estate management office."
"The Henderson Group contracts professionals," Ethan said. He looked at her again, the same deliberate, performed assessment. "This is a gala. There are standards." Clara said nothing. The guests nearby had gone quiet. A circle of attention had formed. "I mean," Ethan said with the smile of a man who believes he is being charming, "there's a certain image we're maintaining here, charity or not. You understand." "I understand," Clara said. "Good." He looked at security near the door. "I think we need to make sure our contractor knows what we expect going forward." The security guard moved toward Clara. Clara picked up her bucket. She looked at Ethan once, briefly, without hostility or appeal. "I'm only here because your mother asked me to come," she said quietly. Ethan laughed. "My mother would never." From across the ballroom, something shifted. The two guests who had watched Clara help Thea with the broken glasses were no longer smiling at Ethan's performance. One lowered her wine glass. One looked away. A board member near the back of the room exchanged a glance with the person beside him, not quite disapproval, but close to the edge of it. The laugh had not landed the way Ethan expected. He did not notice this. "My mother?" he said again, looking at the room for confirmation that was no longer fully there. "She'd never invite someone like—" "Actually," said a voice from the staircase, "I begged her to come." Every face turned. Margaret Ashford stood at the top of the staircase in her evening gown, looking down on her son. And Ethan Ashford, for the first time all evening, was standing in a room that was not laughing with him. He was standing in it, alone. Margaret is on that staircase, and Ethan has just discovered that the room is not behind him. What she says when she reaches Clara and why she has been waiting 25 years and 14 months to say it is the moment this story delivers its first promise. Subscribe right now and turn on the bell. Stay with this. Margaret Ashford came down the staircase with the specific deliberateness of a woman who has decided something and is going to see it through completely. She walked past the frozen security guard, past the guests who had arranged themselves into a silent audience, past her son, who stood in the center of the ballroom with his smile gone, not yet understanding that the room had changed around him, but understanding that it had. She reached Clara. She took Clara's hand in both of hers. The room watched Margaret Ashford, who was 71 years old and had been the most composed person in every room she had ever entered for as long as anyone present could remember, look at Clara Bennett with an expression that the guests had never seen on her face before. It looked like grief and like relief and like the specific emotional complexity of a woman completing something she had been carrying for a very long time. "You've already sacrificed enough for this family," Margaret said quietly. "You should never have been made to feel unwelcome here." Clara looked at her. "It's all right, Mrs. Ashford." "It is not all right," Margaret said, simply, finally. She turned and looked at her son. Ethan had lost the smile entirely. The guests had lost the comfortable feeling of watching someone else be diminished and had acquired the considerably more uncomfortable feeling of watching themselves be seen. The board member at the back of the room said something quietly to the person beside him, and both of them looked at Ethan with the expression of people updating a file they had been keeping. "Mother," Ethan said, "what is this?" "Not here," Margaret said. She looked at Clara. "Will you stay, please?" Clara looked at her bucket, at the service entrance, at the room full of people who had watched what had just happened. "Yes, of course," Clara said. Margaret nodded once. She turned back to her son. "We'll speak after the gala." And Ethan, she held his gaze with an expression that had 38 years of patience behind it and had just reached its end. "Think carefully about what you said tonight." She returned to her position at the far end of the room. The gala continued, but the room felt different, and Ethan Ashford spent the remainder of the evening looking at Clara Bennett across the ballroom with the specific discomfort of a man who has just discovered that a door he assumed led nowhere leads somewhere he does not understand, and thinking in the back of his mind about his mother choosing tonight specifically, about instructions, about whatever his father had left that Margaret had been carrying for 14 months.
The guests left at 11. Ethan did not wait for his mother. He went to his father's study and he started looking. He was not sure what he was looking for. He knew only that his mother's expression, that combination of grief and relief and the weight of something long carried, was not the expression of a woman defending an employee. He went through his father's personal financial records first. He found them within 40 minutes. Monthly transfers, not large, not small, regular, beginning 23 years ago and continuing without interruption until his father's death 14 months ago. The recipient, C. Bennett, $250 a month in the early years, increasing gradually over time. The most recent transfers were $800 a month. Over 23 years, the total was considerable. Not a business expense, not a company payment. Personal transfers from his private account, categorized in the ledger under the heading that said simply, ongoing commitment. He looked at the heading for a long time. He went through the correspondence files next. He found 3 letters addressed to his father in handwriting he did not recognize, kept in an envelope labeled with his father's handwriting, C. Bennett, keep. He read them. They were not love letters. He thought they might be in the first 30 seconds of reading. The personal nature of them, the updates about health, about a father's condition, about medication being adjusted, had the texture of intimacy, and there were the monthly payments in the word keep in his father's handwriting, which was the word his father used for things he valued. The thought formed before he could stop it. My father had an affair. He sat with this for a moment that felt considerably longer than it was. He read the letters again. Then he noticed something. The letters were not the letters of a woman to a lover. They were the letters of someone providing a careful, brief, responsible account of themselves to someone who had an interest in their well-being without being part of their daily life. There was no warmth of intimacy. There was the warmth of 2 people who shared a history that was not romantic, but was significant. The 3rd letter ended with a sentence that had been underlined in his father's hand, which his father only did to things he considered important. I am well enough, and that is sufficient. Please don't worry. And in the margin, in his father's handwriting, 4 words. She never asked for more. Ethan sat at his father's desk at midnight with the letters in his hands and the monthly transfers on the screen. Not an affair. Something else. Something his father considered worth recording under the heading ongoing commitment for 23 years. Something his mother had been carrying instructions about for 14 months and chose tonight, the first charity gala after his father's death, to finally act. He picked up his phone and called his mother. She answered. Tomorrow morning, come for breakfast. Bring nothing. Just come. She hung up. He sat at his father's desk for a long time looking at 4 words. She never asked for more. The transfers are real. The letters are real. And the 4 words his father wrote in the margin are the most important clue in this entire story. But Ethan still doesn't know what happened 25 years ago. What his mother tells him tomorrow morning is the moment everything gets replaced by something true. Stay right here. Margaret made eggs. She did this when she needed to do something with her hands during a difficult conversation, which Ethan had understood since childhood. He sat at the kitchen table and watched her cook and waited. She set the plate in front of him and sat across from him and folded her hands on the table. 25 years ago, she said, your father's company almost ceased to exist. Ethan looked at her. You know we had difficulties in the 90s. You know the business went through a restructuring. What you don't know, what we never told you because your father wanted to protect you from knowing how close it came, is that the restructuring was made necessary by a fire." She told him. The warehouse on Calloway Street had held the company's primary financial documentation: contracts, projections, client records, the paper infrastructure of a business that predated digital systems. The building had caught fire on a November evening 25 years ago. The cause was electrical. The fire department arrived quickly. It was, by all accounts, a manageable fire. But the financial records were on the 3rd floor. Robert Ashford had been in the building when the fire started. He had gotten out. He had stood on the street with everyone else, watching the smoke from the 3rd floor windows, and he had understood, with the specific, terrible clarity of a businessman watching his company's survival disappear, that losing those records would mean losing everything. A young woman standing next to him on the street had heard him say this. She had looked at the building. She had walked to the entrance. The fire department captain had blocked her. She had argued with him for 30 seconds and then gone around him. Nobody asked her to. She had come out 14 minutes later with 2 filing cabinet drawers balanced against her body, her clothing burned, her lungs compromised from smoke inhalation, with the specific expression of someone who has just done something they knew was going to hurt and decided the hurting was worth it. The documents were intact. The company survived. The woman was 21 years old. Her name was Clara Bennett. Ethan sat at the kitchen table and did not speak for a long time. "The injuries," he said finally. "Significant," Margaret said. "Lung damage that required years of treatment, 2 surgeries on her hands. The medication she was put on for the respiratory complications affected her weight permanently and in ways that could not be reversed." The kitchen was completely quiet. "She rebuilt her life doing what she could physically manage," Margaret said. Ethan thought about the school shift, about the medical office at 5:30 in the morning, about the heaviness that was not indulgence but evidence, about a woman who wanted to be the kind of nurse children remembered for the rest of their lives and instead spent 25 years cleaning other people's spaces, carrying a body that bore the permanent mark of a decision she made for a stranger on a November street. "The transfers," Ethan said. "Your father arranged them within the month. He wanted to do far more. He went to see her personally and offered a substantial settlement. She refused it." "She refused?" "Multiple times, over several years, she refused every significant offer he made." Margaret looked at her son. "He asked her once. He told me he asked her just once because she made it clear she didn't want to be asked repeatedly what she actually wanted, what he could actually do." She paused. "She said, 'I cannot repay what you've done,' and she told him, 'You can.'" Margaret folded her hands. "She said, 'If your son ever grows into a man who judges people by what they look like, then everything I suffered was for nothing. Promise me he won't.'" The kitchen was very quiet. "He made that promise. He believed he had kept it. He talked about you often in those last years. He was proud of you." She paused. "But somewhere along the way, the world you moved in taught you things that were louder than what he taught you. And last night—" "I know," Ethan said. "Last night," Margaret said, "your father's promise was broken." She stood and began clearing the table. "There is more," she said. He looked up. "Your father left instructions, sealed, specific, to be carried out at the first charity gala held after his death." She looked at her son. "I kept them for 14 months because I hoped last night would never need to happen, that you would have become the person he believed you were before Clara ever needed to walk through that door." She put the plates in the sink. "I was wrong," she said, "and so I finally honored his instructions." She looked at him. He anticipated this. He knew it was possible. He planned for it. "What was in the instructions?" Ethan said. "Come with me tonight, to Clara's apartment. He left something for you to read there."
in her keeping.
Margaret drove. Ethan sat in the passenger seat and said nothing. Margaret did not attempt conversation. She had learned long ago that certain things needed to be arrived at in silence. Clara's building was a 5-story walk-up in a neighborhood that was not poor exactly and was not comfortable, the specific category of urban neighborhood where working people live who are managing but not succeeding, where the infrastructure is functional and the ambitions are real and the margin is thin. Clara answered the door in comfortable clothes, entirely herself. She looked at Margaret. She looked at Ethan. She stepped back and let them in. The apartment was small and organized with the specific organization of someone who has made peace with limited space and decided that limited space can still be dignified. Plants on the windowsill, photographs on the walls. In the sitting room, Arthur Bennett was in his chair by the window, his eyes clear and warm, looking at Ethan with a direct assessment of someone who has learned to read people quickly. "You're the son," Arthur said. "Yes," Ethan said. "Your mother's been coming here for years. Your father used to come too. Good man, your father. Took me a while to forgive him for not being able to give my daughter her life back, but a good man." Ethan did not know what to say to this. He looked at the wall behind Clara. A framed newspaper clipping, small, 25 years old, a photograph, a building with smoke, a street, figures in the foreground, a young woman being helped by firefighters to an ambulance, carrying the weight of 2 cabinet drawers the firefighter was taking from her, her face turned slightly away from the camera. But the posture, the set of the shoulders, the specific way she held herself even in that moment. He recognized her. He turned around. Clara was watching him from the sofa. "You kept it," he said. "My father kept it," Clara said. "He was very proud, even though he was terrified." She smiled briefly. "He said, 'The building was on fire and you went toward it.' I said, 'The man needed help.' He said, 'Most people don't do that.' I said, 'Most people should.'" Ethan looked at her hands. The slight irregularity in the way she had set down the tea tray, visible now that he knew what to look for. He looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. Clara looked at him. "I know you are," Clara said. "I want to do something, more than sorry." "I know," Clara said. "Your mother has been telling me for years what you would want to do when the day came." She held his gaze. "I'm not going to tell you what I need. You need to figure that out yourself." She looked at the newspaper clipping. "Your father figured it out," she said. "It took him a while, but he figured it out." She looked back at Ethan. "Your mother said he left something for you to read here." Margaret opened her bag. She placed an envelope on the table between them. Ethan's name on the front, in his father's handwriting. He opened it. 3 pages. His father's handwriting. The specific, careful script Ethan had grown up reading on birthday cards and school notes, in the margin comments his father made on documents he wanted Ethan to study. He read it slowly. Arthur Bennett sat by the window and looked at the street. Margaret sat beside Clara on the sofa and did not speak. The apartment was completely quiet. Some of what was in those 3 pages belonged only to Ethan and his father's memory, but one passage he would later say aloud when people asked him why he changed. "I have tried to show you the value of success, and I think I have mostly succeeded in that. What I am less certain of is whether I showed you the cost of it, not the financial cost, but the human cost. The cost of what other people give so that we can have what we have. Clara Bennett walked into a burning building so that I could keep the company you now run. She was 21 years old, and she did not hesitate, and nobody asked her to, and she has never, not once in 25 years, made me feel that I owed her anything she had not already been repaid. She gave me a gift I can never match, and she carried the physical consequences of it every day, and she could not become the nurse she had trained to be. And she built her life inside what remained, and she never complained, and she never asked, and she never stopped being kind. If you are reading this letter, it means you have encountered Clara, and something has gone wrong. It means the lesson I was most afraid of failing to teach you has not been learned. So I am writing it down. A person's worth is not visible. It cannot be assessed by looking. The things that make a person extraordinary, courage, generosity, the willingness to give something real at real cost, these things are invisible until the moment they are needed. Clara was invisible to everyone on that street. Then she was the only person that mattered. Clara asked me for one thing. She said, "If your son ever grows into a man who judges people by what they look like, then everything I suffered was for nothing. Promise me he won't." I promised. I was wrong to believe the promise alone was sufficient. Some things can only be learned through encounter. This is why I have asked your mother to bring you to this apartment, to this chair, in front of this woman, so that you can read this letter in the same room as the person it is about. Look at her, Ethan. She has been worth looking at this entire time. You simply never looked. Ethan set the letter down. The apartment was completely quiet. He looked at Clara. She was looking at her hands. Arthur Bennett said from his chair by the window, without turning around, "He wrote that 3 years before he died. He hoped you'd never need to read it." Clara looked up. Her father's voice had been completely matter-of-fact. She looked at him. Then she looked at Ethan. She said, "He hoped the same thing. I know he did." Ethan looked at the letter. He looked at the newspaper clipping on the wall. He looked at Clara, at what 25 years looked like on a person who gave something real at real cost and rebuilt their life inside what remained and had not once presented themselves to the family as someone owed anything. He looked for a long time. Then he looked at his father's handwriting. Look at her. She has been worth looking at this entire time. You simply never looked. Ethan has read the letter. He is sitting in Clara's apartment, looking at the person his father trusted with the most important thing he had to say to his son. What happens over the next 6 months and what Clara finally agrees to is the ending this story has been building toward. Stay right here.
Ethan did not make a grand gesture. He had considered one. His instinct, when confronted with something he had gotten badly wrong, was to fix it at scale, to produce something large and visible that demonstrated the correction had been made. He did not do this. He went back to the apartment 2 days later, alone, without Margaret, with a notebook. He sat across from Clara and her father and asked questions, not about himself, about them, about what was needed, about the daily reality of her father's care looked like and where the gaps were, and what would actually help versus what would look like help from a distance. Clara answered carefully, with the caution of someone who has learned not to trust large offers quickly. He went back a 3rd time, a 4th. He had a conversation with a specialist about Arthur's condition. He had a conversation with an attorney about what a properly structured support arrangement would look like. Not charity, not a transfer, but something with dignity and permanence. He had a conversation with Clara in which he described what he was thinking and asked her to tell him where he was wrong. She told him he was wrong about 2 things. He revised them. He called the Henderson Group. He spoke with the director. He explained what had happened at his event, took full responsibility, and asked what the appropriate professional correction looked like. The director, who had been in this business for 20 years, was quiet for a moment. "Most people," she said, "just don't book us again." "That's not sufficient," Ethan said. He made it right with the company. He made it right with Clara in the terms they negotiated together over 4 visits to the apartment, where the plants on the windowsill were thriving and Arthur sat by the window and read the newspaper and occasionally commented on things he found interesting without preamble or context. The people from the gala heard about it gradually through the movement of information in social circles where everyone eventually knows everything. The board member who had exchanged a look at the back of the room called Ethan the following month and said simply, "Good," and hung up. Clara did not participate in any of these conversations. She was, as usual, busy. 6 months later, Ethan called Clara and asked if she would be willing to meet with the Ashford Foundation's board, not as a guest, not as a recipient, as a candidate for Director of Community Programs, a role the board had agreed needed to exist and needed to be held by someone who understood from the inside what the people the foundation was supposed to serve actually needed. Clara said she would think about it. She thought about it for 2 weeks. She said yes. She was not, as she made clear to Ethan in the conversation where she accepted, doing it for him or for his redemption narrative or any reason connected to the fire or the gala or 25 years of history. She was doing it because the work was real and she was good at it, and the people the foundation served needed someone who would not treat them as problems to be managed, but as people to be heard. She was also doing it because Arthur had said when she told him she was considering it, "You've been cleaning other people's spaces for 25 years. Maybe it's time to build something of your own." The foundation staff learned within the first month that Clara was not there for decoration. She returned calls, she visited programs herself, she remembered people's names, she asked about details from previous conversations weeks later. The programs improved. The board noted this in the first quarterly review with the satisfaction of people who have made a good decision and know it.
The Foundation's annual community event was held at the Ashford estate. Not a gala, a barbecue. Margaret's suggestion, accepted by Ethan without negotiation because he had learned which of his mother's suggestions required no negotiation. 300 people, community members, foundation staff, board members, and the Henderson Group director, invited because Ethan thought it was the right thing to do and because Clara had agreed. Clara moved through the event the way she moved through everything, efficiently, warmly, paying attention to the people standing alone rather than the ones already in conversation. A man arrived late, a new board member who had not attended an in-person event. He was shown around by one of the administrative staff. At one point, he saw Clara near the service area, checking on the food, and asked who she was. "She's the Director of Community Programs," the staff member said. "She runs about half of the things that make this foundation work." The new board member looked at Clara, at her size, at her comfortable clothes, at the ease with which she moved through the space. "Oh," he said. Ethan appeared at the board member's elbow. He had heard the "oh." He looked at his new board member pleasantly. "Clara Bennett walked into a burning building 25 years ago and saved everything my father had built. She is the reason I inherited a company rather than a bankruptcy." He said it simply, without drama. "She is also the most capable person on our staff." He looked at the board member. "She has been worth looking at this entire time. I simply never looked." He moved on. Clara, who had not heard any of this, looked up from her work and caught Ethan's eye across the courtyard. She gave him a small nod. He gave one back. Margaret, watching from the terrace, looked back at her father's photograph inside through the open doors. She thought Robert would have approved of how the day had gone. She thought that he would have been glad. She thought, with the specific peace of a woman who has been carrying something for a very long time and finally set it down, that the promise he had made had been broken and that the repair had been real. That was enough. That was more than enough. Ethan Ashford looked at a woman at his gala and saw someone who did not belong. He was wrong. She had belonged to his family story for 25 years before he ever encountered her. She had walked into a burning building at 21 years old. Nobody asked her to, so that his father could keep the company Ethan would eventually inherit. She had lost her career she had dreamed of. She had rebuilt her life inside what remained. She had refused every significant offer of compensation and asked for one thing: a promise that a child would grow up understanding that what a person is worth cannot be seen. That promise had been broken in a ballroom in a November evening, with a laugh, in a gesture, in a room of guests who went along with it because the person laughing was powerful and Clara was not. But Robert Ashford planned for this. He had written a letter. He had left instructions. He had placed them with Clara, the person he trusted most, with the most important thing he had to say to his son. And Margaret had waited 14 months for the right moment to honor those instructions. Ethan gave her the right moment. He did not become a different person overnight. He became a different person over 6 months of visits to a small apartment, in 2 weeks of listening, and 1 year of watching Clara Bennett show him what it looks like when a person's character is their entire resume. His father had tried to teach him this. The letter had tried to teach him this. It took sitting in that apartment in front of the person it was about to finally understand. Look at her. She has been worth looking at this entire time. You simply never looked. Robert Ashford made a promise to a woman who saved his life. He left a letter in case his son broke it. He trusted Clara to hold it, and Clara held it for 25 years, the same way she held everything. Quietly, completely, without asking for anything. Ethan Ashford finally looked. It only took him 1 evening in a ballroom, and 1 morning in a kitchen, and 1 afternoon in a small apartment to see what had been there the whole time. Now I want to know what you think. First question: if you were Clara, after being publicly humiliated in front of 140 people by a man whose family owed you everything, would you have accepted his apology, or would you have walked away and let him figure out the rest entirely on his own? Second question: Robert Ashford made Clara a promise and then raised a son who broke it. Do you think he failed as a father, or do you think some lessons can only be learned through experience, and no parent can fully protect a child from becoming someone they never intended to raise? There is no wrong answer. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know where you stand. And before you go, drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Our community spans every continent, and we love seeing it. If this story moved you, share it today with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit that button, turn on the notification bell. Tomorrow's story is already written, and you do not want to miss it. I will see you there.